A crisis is unfolding in the East African nation of Somalia, which is teetering on the edge of famine. According to the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, more than half of Somalia's children will face acute malnutrition through mid-2023. That's about 1.8 million kids, including more than 500,000 who are likely to be severely malnourished. A drought, as well as soaring food prices, are worsening the country's famine. Lynsey Addario is a photojournalist on assignment for National Geographic, and she captured these images of the tragic food shortages in Somalia. Lynsey joins me now. Her works are currently on display at the School of Visual Arts in New York in her first ever retrospective on her nearly 25-year-long career. Lynsey, thank you so much for being with us. You've just returned. How long were you in Somalia, and what was the experience like?
So I was there a total of 10 days. I was there between October 8th and the 18th, and so really just returned. And I started the trip in Puntland in the north, which is currently IPC 4. You discussed it's an emergency situation. The situation there was incredible in that because the security is not as tight as in other places in the country, we were able to move around. And what you see are, you have the landscape sort of littered with carcasses of animals that have died because of the ongoing drought. It's now, the country has entered the 5th failed rainy season. Animals are dying en masse. Many families have lost all of their animals and have forced them to be displaced into these camps all across Somalia. And so I started there, and then I traveled down to Baidoa, which is really the heart of where likely will be declared a famine. And there it is IPC 5. It is catastrophic conditions.
We saw in one of your pictures there of the carcasses. Is there any livestock alive that you saw?
Not in Baidoa. I saw very few animals still alive in a place like Baidoa. Baidoa is surrounded by al-Shabaab. Really, people come there in sheer desperation. There are already 600,000 people in Baidoa living in some 500 different camps. And so by the time they get there, their animals have already died. Their children are already, many of them are severely malnourished. And there is a stabilization center I visited run by Save the Children, where there is a constant flow of young children under 5 and who are just getting treatment consistently.
One of the pictures you took was of Fatima and her 3-month-old son. Can you tell us what's happening in that picture?
So that picture was from the Gardo Hospital up in Puntland, and her son was 3 months old. He was struggling with severe malnutrition. He had pneumonia also. He basically had been constantly sick since he was born. The family was dependent on other pastoralists who provided them with camel's milk and other animal products. But because of the drought, all of their relatives had to leave the proximity where they were living close to that family and go in search of water. So essentially, that family was left without food. And so Fatima was standing over, she was basically caring for her son, Khalid. And what we later learned was his final day of life. He died the next day.
So what's captured in that picture is not just an intimate portrait of family, a mother and child, but also it's the result of the separation of family that happens as a result of the extreme conditions.
Absolutely. I mean, much of Somalia is dependent on their livestock, and that livestock is dependent on water. And if there is no water, people have to go in search of water, and that means walking for days, if not weeks.
There is so much devastation and sadness in these photographs, and yet, as a photographer, you deal in color and light and the beauty of the world. Is it possible to think of beauty in such a tragic situation?
I mean, part of my job is to bring the viewer in to try to look at the photograph and start to ask questions of what is going on here, to engage with the image. So I think it's ironic, of course, that I'm looking for beauty in these horrific situations. But in my experience in the last 20, 25 years, is that if a picture is too graphic and if it is too hard, generally people will turn away. It's human nature. So if I can provide a picture, if I can take a picture that also captures the intimacy intimacy, the light, those tender moments, then people tend to engage.
You use the word engage, and in your photographs, it seems quite obvious that you are leaving room for the viewer to be a part of the picture, to engage with it. In other words, it's not just a stark, in-your-face kind of picture. Is that intentional with your work?
Of course. I mean, I cover very, very difficult topics. This was Somalia. I've been working in Ukraine all year. I've covered wars, basically every war of the last 2 decades. And I think, you know, it's very important for me for people to pay attention, for them not to forget the victims of whether it is climate change, drought, war. These are things that we need to pay attention to. And families are losing children. It's 2022. It should not be happening that 300,000 children under 5 years old right now are facing the prospect of famine just in Baidoa. You know, it's a desperate situation.
Desperate indeed. Lynsey Addario, thank you for taking us there with your pictures and for being with us to discuss them. You can see her full piece on nationalgeographic.com.